The papers were crisp, the binding expensive, and the numbers terrifying. Keanu Charles Reeves sat in his minimalist, high-tech study overlooking the Pacific, the roar of the surf muffled by triple-pane glass. He was, too, dressed like a movie star preparing for a publicity shoot. He was in a comfortable, worn hoodie, the famous dark hair tied back loosely, the expression on his face grave. For the world, he was Neo, John Wick, and Ted Logan, an accessible legend of effortless cool. But tonight, he was the majority silent partner in the Arcadian Group, a sprawling conglomerate dealing in everything from logistics software to sustainable farming. He ran a hand across his jaw, focusing on the audit reports spread across the mahogany table. The financial discrepancies weren't subtle, they were brazen. Shell companies, inflated supply costs, and a stunning pattern of executive bonuses spiking inversely to actual profit margins in the last 2 quarters. Fraud, mismanagement, and what looked dangerously like severe corporate asset stripping. "They're treating my investment like a personal ATM," Keanu muttered, leaning back in his chair. He was worried, not just about the millions he'd poured into Arcadian, but about the company's reputation, a reputation built on ethical investment and sustainable growth. If this corruption went public, it would be a nuclear blast. He had initially tasked his top legal team to draft a swift, discreet internal investigation, but the reports they'd provided were too sanitized, too easily dismissed by the C-suite he was meant to trust. Whoever was running this game was powerful, connected, and deeply entrenched in the structure of Arcadian. Sending in external auditors would simply prompt the guilty parties to clean house. Keanu closed the folder labeled Q2, Q3, Analysis, Anomalous Capital Migration. He stood up, pacing the cool, polished floor. There was only one way to get the necessary ground truth, the unfiltered reality of who was doing what, where, and when. He had to go in himself. He had to become someone invisible. His skill set wasn't just acting. It was immersion. It was becoming the role so completely that the truth bled through every interaction. And who, in a modern, impersonal corporation, was more overlooked than the help? He reached for the secure line, dialing a number that routed through 3 different private satellites before connecting. The phone rang once before being answered by a crisp, professional voice. "You have 24 hours, Keanu said, his voice dropping into a low, purposeful register. "I need the best prosthetics, the best wardrobe, the best documentation. Full transformation. Nobody, absolutely nobody outside of this call can know." "Sir, where exactly are you going?" the voice on the other end asked, already typing furiously. "I need to be Gary," Keanu stated, his mind already sketching the details of the persona. Gary is the guy they call in at 11 p.m. to fix the fiber lines running to the executive suites. He's Tier 1 IT support, works the graveyard shift. He's seen too much to care, and he's been there too long to be fired. He wears cheap reading glasses. He smells faintly of coffee and old circuits, and he blends into the beige background like a smudge. He paused, a faint, almost dangerous glint entering his eyes. "And make sure those boots squeak." Keanu looked down at the financial reports one last time, the weight of his secret ownership settling over him like a heavy mantle. He was about to trade his Hollywood life for a utility closet, the applause of millions for the hum of a server rack. Gary would find out who was trying to burn his company down. And Gary would do it without anyone realizing that the scruffy technician climbing under the desks was the man who actually signed their paychecks. The investigation had begun. The transition took 12 hours, and the combined, sworn-to-secrecy efforts of 2 of Hollywood's most renowned prosthetic artists, flown in under non-disclosure agreements that would make the CIA blush. The man who stepped out of the makeup trailer was not Keanu Reeves. Keanu's natural stillness and power were replaced by a profound, almost painful frailty. The dark, iconic hair was gone, replaced by a thin, uneven thatch of dusty gray. Prosthetic adhesives had sunk his cheeks, elongated his nose, and pulled his lower lip down into a permanent expression of weary resignation. His skin, usually healthy and smooth, was mapped with sun damage and age spots, the texture carefully roughened. He was thin, alarmingly so. Special padding and corsetry were used, paradoxically, to make his muscular frame appear wasted, sunken in the chest, and curved into a permanent slump. The final touch was the wardrobe. Layers of cheap, ill-fitting clothes, a gray polyester jacket several sizes too big, a pair of worn canvas trousers, and cracked, heavy boots laced unevenly. This man was Stephen Olide, a face of pure, grinding anonymity, a vagrant, an invisible man. "Walk for me, Stephen," said Lizette, the lead prosthetics designer, adjusting a graying wig strand that stuck out too aggressively. Keanu, drawing on decades of intense method training, inhaled deeply, emptying himself of John Wick's kinetic coiled energy. He felt the weight of the boots, the ache in the fabricated posture. His steps were slow, shuffling, punctuated by a slight, uncontrollable tremor in his right hand. He had practiced for days, using internal muscular constraints to create the illusion of bone-deep fatigue and joint pain. "Too smooth on the turn," advised Lizette. "You're in pain, Keanu. Every pivot is a compromise with your back. Fight the turn, then slump into it." Keanu nodded. Or rather, Stephen Olide acknowledged the correction with a grim, downturned mouth. He tried again. The turn was jagged, awkward, ending with a small, convincing catch in his breath. "Perfect. Keanu Reeves is dead," he murmured, his voice now lower, scratchier, and carrying the gravelly rasp of years spent yelling into the wind. "Only Stephen Olide remains." The target was the Arcadian Group's West Coast logistics hub, a massive complex of glass and steel, nestled deep in the sprawl of Southern California's Industrial Valley. This was the operational center for the supply chain fraud documented in the audit reports, the place where the phantom inventory was being logged and invoiced. It was 4:30 a.m. The air was cold, thick with the smell of diesel and damp concrete. Keanu's personal driver, a formidable former Marine named Mac, waited discreetly by a tinted Ford Transit van parked 3 blocks from the hub's main security gate. Mac hated this. He was paid to protect the CEO and the action hero, not drop off a seemingly derelict man in a dangerous pre-dawn zone. "You have the burner phone, sir?" Mac asked quietly, his eyes scanning the deserted streets. Stephen Olide lifted his heavy coat sleeve, revealing the cracked face of a cheap digital watch. Keanu, high-tech monitoring gear was sewn into the lining. "I'm good, Mac. You wait here. If you see me before the coded text, you don't know me." "Understood, Mr. Reeves, but, seriously, be careful. That's a tough look to maintain if things go sideways." Stephen Olide offered a small, unsettling smile, a flash of Keanu's inherent intensity peeking through the prosthetic age. "They won't see me. That's the point." He exited the van slowly, adjusting the battered baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. As Mac's van melted silently into the dark, Stephen Olide began his laborious shuffle toward the gleaming fortress of the Arcadian Group. The guards at the gate were running through their morning security checks. They glanced at the approaching figure, a shuffling old man, probably looking for bottles or a place to sleep out of the wind. They dismissed him instantly. He was a piece of the landscape, part of the urban decay they were paid to keep outside the pristine walls. Stephen Olide, the supposed vagrant, leaned heavily against a low concrete wall barely 50 feet from the main lobby entrance. His eyes, Keanu's fierce, intelligent eyes, scanned the delivery schedules posted publicly on a clipboard behind the security booth glass. He was less than 100 yards from millions of dollars of his own equity, completely invisible, ready to watch his company destroy itself from the outside in. The investigation had begun. The luxury shopping district was a fortress built of polished granite and high commerce. It smelled sharply of ozone, expensive perfume, and the faint, sweet decay of money being transferred. Stephen Olide walked against the current of the afternoon rush, moving at the deliberate, shuffling pace of a man who had nowhere left to hurry. The heavy, cracked leather boots felt like anchors. Every step was a careful study in inefficiency, designed to maximize the visible effort of movement. He passed mirrored storefronts selling diamond necklaces and limited edition Italian leather. In the glass reflection, he saw the face of Stephen, hollowed, gray, and fundamentally undesirable. The man in the glass was a visual deterrent, a warning sign against the potential costs of failure. Normally, the mere presence of Keanu Reeves in this district would create a seismic event, a ripple of phone cameras and excited gasps. Now, the seismic event was one of profound avoidance. People adjusted their trajectory mid-stride to skirt wide around the cheap polyester jacket. A woman in crisp linen actively turned her head, pretending to receive an urgent call rather than acknowledge the air he breathed. Invisible, Keanu thought, settling the weight of the old jacket on his shoulders. Completely invisible. It was a power he hadn't possessed since he was a teenager riding the bus unnoticed. But this invisibility was laced with contempt, not benign neglect. His target was Adder & Co., an ultra-high-end bespoke jeweler and the flagship holding of the investment trust he co-owned. The location was a gleaming three-story jewel box dominating the corner plaza. His investment, his legacy in part, was tied up in the integrity and reputation of this structure, and he suspected that integrity was rotting from within, starting with Fiona Aderin, the company's chief operating officer. Stephen found his observation post, a low, chipped stone ledge bordering a small, neglected ornamental bush near the main plaza fountain, just within visual range of Aderin's private entrance. It was a place where maintenance staff would occasionally smoke and forget to empty the butt receptacle. Perfect. He didn't just sit. He collapsed onto the stone, allowing the prosthetic curvature of his spine to define the position. His left hand automatically moved to clutch the edge of the jacket, a gesture of pathetic self-preservation. The mission was simple: observe Fiona Aderin's routine. Who did she meet outside of the office? How did she conduct herself when she believed she was outside the purview of corporate surveillance? Keanu focused his deep, intelligent eyes, the only part of him that remained truly his, on the polished brass doors. He had to remember the voice, a low, gravelly rasp achieved by holding his throat in a very specific, slightly strained manner. He had to remember the breathing, shallow and punctuated by soft, wet coughs. He had to be Stephen. The moment he allowed the easy strength of Keanu Reeves to surface, the illusion would shatter. The security guard emerged from the store to shoo a harmless, small dog away from the window display. The guard's gaze swept across the plaza, registering the high-value targets: a couple entering a Bentley, a socialite on her phone, and the low-valued debris. When the guard's eyes landed on Stephen, they immediately glazed over, sliding past the seated figure as if he were a landscaping fixture. Stephen registered the dismissal and breathed a shallow sigh of relief. The disguise held. He settled in, the gritty texture of the polyester against his skin, creating a mental partition between the owner and the operative. 45 minutes passed in slow, agonizing increments. The sun moved, throwing a glare off the polished windows. Stephen watched the foot traffic, his mind running complex data analysis on patterns of movement, delivery schedules, and the subtle cues of the local economy. Beneath the guise of a weary bum, Keanu Reeves, the astute businessman, was calculating asset risk. Then, the brass doors opened, and a uniformed young man held them wide. Fiona Aderin stepped out. She was perfectly composed, dressed in a sharp, dove-gray suit that spoke of enormous expense and zero tolerance for imperfection. She carried herself with the entitled, proprietary air of someone who viewed the ground she walked on as a minor inconvenience to her destination. Fiona paused, pulling on Italian leather gloves. She was talking briskly into a small Bluetooth headset, her tone imperious and hurried. "No, I told you, Marco. The figures need to reflect the pre-Q3 valuation, regardless of the shortfall in overseas accounts. Fix it. I don't pay you to create spreadsheets. I pay you to create reality." Quote. Stephen Olide, the old man on the bench, coughed dryly. clutching his chest. Fiona Adarin didn't flinch. She took 3 steps forward, adjusting the strap of her handbag, and then performed the most insulting, complete act of social erasure Stephen had ever experienced. She didn't just ignore him. She didn't even see the space he occupied. As she strode past, her handbag, a heavy structured piece of black leather, clipped the cheap polyester jacket covering Stephen's knee. She didn't apologize. She didn't look down. She didn't even break the flow of her conversation. She walked on as if she had brushed against a lamppost or a discarded piece of trash. The brush was momentary, but the physical contact sent a jolt through Keanu. He felt the cold shock of her casual arrogance, a feeling far more abrasive than any scripted movie punch. "Oh, Fiona," he thought, allowing Stephen's frail shoulders to slump further. "You just touched the wrong piece of trash." He kept his head down, watching her progress down the street. She stopped a short distance away, near a sleek, black sedan that had just pulled up to the curb. She waved off the chauffeur, instead greeting the man who had emerged from the back seat. The man was tall, impeccably dressed, and familiar. Stephen's internal database, the memory bank of a celebrity who studies industry players, flashed recognition. That was an Adarin colleague. That was Elias Thane, CEO of Blackwater Solutions, a rival firm that specialized in hostile corporate acquisitions and asset stripping. Fiona and Elias exchanged a look that was too intimate for a casual business meeting. She handed him a small, sealed envelope. Not a digital exchange, but a physical one, meant to bypass any electronic trail. Keanu, playing Stephen, watched the illicit exchange. The vagrant on the bench had just witnessed the first clear sign of corporate treason against the company he secretly owned. The observation had begun. And the man Fiona Adarin dismissed as a nobody was now the only one who knew her secret. The heavy, rhythmic beat of the city, a pulse of commerce and consumption, had begun to grate on Keanu's nerves. The isolation of the costume was effective, but the reality of the social vacuum around Stephen Olide was a denser, colder thing than he had anticipated. It was one thing to vanish. It was another to be actively treated as a contaminant. He was heading toward the gleaming, mirrored entrance of the Etheria Financial Group building, the exact corporate entity he held a controlling interest in when the incident occurred. His shuffling, inefficient pace brought him into the high-traffic nexus, where the sidewalk narrowed near a display window featuring minimalist sculptures priced higher than his mortgage. Keanu, still deep in character, adjusted the weight of a non-existent tool belt and misjudged the distance required by a fast-moving figure coming the opposite way. It was a brush, barely a fraction of a second of contact. Stephen Olide's cheap, rough polyester jacket snagged against the pristine, structured sleeve of a woman wearing an ensemble that screamed 5,000 retail minimum. The woman stopped instantly, her movement freezing into an attitude of violent shock. "Excuse me," she hissed, the word cutting through the background chatter like splintered glass. Stephen Olide, startled, immediately adopted the posture of meek apology. Keanu made sure the hunched apology was visible, hands slightly raised in the universal sign of, "I am sorry for existing near you." He pushed his voice into the low, raspy range he had practiced. "My profound apologies, ma'am," he rasped. "Didn't see you there. Very sorry." The woman, impeccably sharp in a power suit that managed to look simultaneously fierce and delicate, was beautiful in the aggressive way of high finance. Her face was structured, severe, and currently contorted by an outrage that seemed disproportionate to the minor contact. She adjusted the cuff of her jacket, examining the spot where his sleeve had touched hers, as if searching for a biological hazard. "Very sorry?" She spat, her eyes raking Stephen's face, the hollowed eyes, the gray skin, the cheap fabric of the jacket. She didn't look at the man, she looked at the dirt she perceived. "Do you have any idea what this coat is?" she demanded, her voice rising, drawing the inevitable curious stares of the surrounding public. People who immediately sided with the expensive suit against the cheap polyester. No, ma'am, I don't," Stephen stammered truthfully. "It's virgin cashmere, you filth. And you. She leaned closer, the scent of a powerful, modern perfume overwhelming Stephen's meager, dusty odor. You have just polluted it with whatever residual garbage you dragged in from your gutter life. Quote, dot. Keanu felt a cold spike of clinical interest pierce the discomfort. This was not just generalized annoyance. This was deep-seated, institutionalized contempt for anyone perceived as lower status. He needed to remember her face, her tone, and especially her extreme language. I offered my apologies. If there's damage, I'll... She cut him off with a high, sharp laugh of incredulity. You? Damage? Don't be pathetic. What are you going to do? Offer me your social security number and $3? Quote, dot. She then produced a wallet, sleek, metallic, impossibly thin, and extracted a single, crisp $50 bill. She didn't hand it to him. She flicked it onto the sidewalk, letting the breeze carry it a few inches away from Stephen's heavy boots. Take that and go buy yourself a brush and an identity, she said dismissively. The few passers-by paused, looking, judging. None stepped in. This was a private matter of social hierarchy being brutally enforced. Keanu's internal voice, the voice of the stakeholder, was screaming, but Stephen Olyde had to remain passive, beaten. As Stephen bent stiffly to retrieve the bill, acknowledging the power differential in a public square, the woman delivered the final, stunning blow. And you need to learn to stay in your lane, nobody. Quote, dot. She brought her hand up quickly and sharply. Her palm met Stephen Olyde's cheekbone with a loud, stinging smack. The sound echoed off the polished granite of the district. The physical force was negligible to Keanu, who had trained for action roles for decades, but the violation was total. He inhaled sharply, maintaining the character, the low-status recipient of unwarranted violence. He straightened slowly, his eyes wide and vacant, the way a truly defeated man reacts. Fiona Uttaran, for that was her name. Keanu filed it away instantly, cross-referencing her facial structure against the HR files he had memorized, straightened her jacket again, her expression one of utter disdain mixed with righteous satisfaction. She looked powerful, entitled, and completely untouchable. Now get out of my sight, she commanded. She turned on her heel and continued her walk toward the Etheria Financial Group entrance, never looking back at the pathetic figure she had just assaulted. Stephen Olyde stood immobile for a full minute, the sting on his cheek slowly fading beneath the thick layers of prosthetic makeup. He tucked the $50 bill carefully into the inner pocket of his polyester jacket. Nobody. He was the controlling partner, the major shareholder whose capital enabled her entire operation. He could have her contract terminated, her severance package voided, her reputation destroyed with a single, untraceable email. Instead, Keanu straightened his hunched posture just enough to allow himself a deep, controlled breath. He felt the cold, hard certainty of his mission settle deeper into his bones. He had just received undeniable, physical proof that the toxicity he suspected ran deeper than quarterly reports and performance metrics. It ran all the way to the heart of the corporate culture. Stephen Olyde adjusted his threadbare collar and, maintaining the slow, deliberate shuffle of a man with nothing left to lose, continued his walk toward the towering glass facade of Etheria Financial Group. He knew Fiona Aderin worked on the 28th floor. He was coming to work alongside the staff, and he had a bruise to show for his first 5 minutes on the job. Hands slightly raised in the universal gesture of, "I'm nothing, please don't hurt me," quote, dot. The woman, impeccably tailored in bone-white silk and charcoal tweed, a uniform of absolute, unquestioned financial authority, did not look at Stephen Olyde's face. Her gaze was riveted on the subtle imperfection he had introduced to her sleeve. "You absolute brute!" she spat, her voice pitched low but razor-sharp. She took a step back, angling her body away as if the mere proximity of Stephen Olyde's cheap polyester might be chemically corrosive. Keanu, utilizing years of method training and subtle body control, forced Stephen Olyde's shoulders to slump further, the hunch of the janitor's back becoming more pronounced. He dipped his head, letting his heavily shadowed wig obscure his eyes. "I am so sorry, ma'am." "My fault entirely," Keanu mumbled, ensuring the voice was thick, slightly gravelly, and entirely lacking in the resonant authority that had once characterized John Wick's growl. The woman raised a single sculptured eyebrow and finally flicked her eyes toward his disguise. Her lip curled. "Oh, you're Etheria staff. Low level, obviously. Quote, dot. She reached into her small, expensive handbag and pulled out a microfiber cleaning cloth, the kind used for camera lenses, and fastidiously began rubbing the exact spot where the jacket had touched her. "Look at this," she continued, speaking less to him and more to the abstract injustice of his existence. "That's residue. Your filth. Do you have any concept of what this suit costs? Do you know the dry cleaning specialty required for this grade of Japanese silk?" Quote, dot. Keanu, the actual majority shareholder of Etheria Financial Group, knew precisely how much the suit cost, because he had seen the annual executive expense reports. He knew the woman, Fiona Vance, Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions, held stock options in the company that currently paid for the suit she was rubbing. "No, ma'am," Stephen whispered. "I don't." Quote, dot. Fiona Vance replaced the cloth, her eyes radiating a contempt so pure it was almost beautiful. "Of course you don't," she scoffed. "Because if you understood value, you wouldn't be wearing that synthetic garbage, and you wouldn't be cluttering up the entrance of my office building. You smell like stale air and mop water." Quote, dot. This was the tipping point. Keanu had expected classism. He had experienced microaggressions. But this level of dehumanization, treating a low-wage worker not as an inconvenience but as a biological contamination, was deeply jarring. It wasn't poor management, it was moral rot. "I'm running late for a $10 million close," Fiona announced, pushing past him. She stopped just out of reaching distance, turning back with a cold, predatory smile. "Listen, Stephen Olide, or whatever your name is. I recognize the jacket. If I find one single mark on this suit when I get upstairs, I will call maintenance and HR, and you will be out on the street by lunch. You understand? You don't touch high-value items, and that includes me." Quote, dot. She didn't wait for a response, clicking her heels sharply against the sidewalk and marching into the dazzling glass lobby of the Etheria building, a monument to the financial dominance she clearly felt entitled to. Stephen Olide stood motionless, absorbing the toxic blast. Keanu felt the heat rising under the latex and prosthetics, not from exertion, but from a calculated fury. The incident confirmed everything his gut had warned him about. The company wasn't suffering from an algorithmic glitch or a market dip. It was suffering from a cancer of the soul, where the low status were treated as invisible threats, disposable human costs. He, the secret owner, had just been personally threatened with termination by a vice president who didn't even know his name, or rather, the name of the identity he had temporarily adopted. He had been dismissed, categorized, and threatened with financial ruin, all over a momentary snag of polyester against silk. Keanu let out a shuddering sigh, ensuring the sound was weak and mournful, perfectly in line with Stephen Olide's presumed emotional state. He adjusted the brim of his cap and shuffled toward the service entrance, his initial investigative motive, checking ledger accuracy, now supplanted by a far more urgent personal directive. Fiona Vance and anyone like her need to go. He entered the cool, echoing concrete cavern of the loading dock, already strategizing. He was no longer gathering data on efficiency. He was gathering ammunition for an executive purge. The shareholder was angry, and the janitor was the perfect witness. "Look at this," she continued, speaking less to him and more to the abstract injustice, turning slightly so the light caught the meticulous stitching of her sleeve. "This, Stephen, or whatever your name is. It's silk, Italian. Do you have any idea how much this suit cost? More than your annual salary, I assure you." Quote, dot. Keanu, keeping his eyes downcast, the heavy makeup pulling the skin around his eyes into convincing pouches of fatigue, fought a lifetime of trained reactions. Every instinct honed by decades of high-octane choreography screamed at him to straighten, to lock eyes, to deploy the low, dangerous tone that ended conversations instantly. But John Wick was sealed deep beneath the silicone and cheap polyester. Stephen Olide was just a man who smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and impending retirement. "I'm deeply sorry, ma'am," Keanu repeated, the forced huskiness in his throat tasting like ash. He willed the recording device hidden in the handle of the mop bucket to be picking up every nuanced inflection of her disdain. The woman sighed, a heavy, theatrical expulsion of air designed to convey the immense burden of dealing with incompetence. "Deeply sorry means nothing to me," she snapped. She took another step closer, invading the janitor's personal space. Her expensive, manicured hand, weighed down by an understated but unmistakably valuable gold watch, suddenly moved, not to strike, but to jab fiercely into the center of Keanu's chest, right where the polyester jacket stretched across his sternum. "You people," she hissed, emphasizing the word like a foreign contaminant. "You drag down the whole aesthetic of Etheria. You stand here, costing the company time and resources, while the real talent, the people who actually generate value, have to clean up your physical and operational messes." Quote dot. The pressure of the jab was trivial, yet the intent was pure, aggressive condescension. Keanu felt a tremor of true, unscripted rage surge up his neck. "I own 52% of this operation. You are insulting my investment and my staff." He gripped the heavy handle of the mop bucket until the cheap plastic creaked, the sound fortunately masked by the low hum of the building's HVAC system. He needed her to continue. He needed the evidence trail to be undeniable. The executive, seeing no immediate defiance, only the slumped posture and the shame she intended, seemed emboldened. She glanced around the hallway, confirming their isolation. "And you know what the worst part is, Stephen?" She leaned in conspiratorially, though her breath smelled sharp, like high-end peppermint and cynicism. "We can't fire you quickly enough. HR protection, union clauses, the cost of severance packages. You're a liability we have to maintain." Quote dot. As if to punctuate her final dismissal of his humanity, she drew her hand back and delivered a sharp, open-handed slap across the side of Keanu's cheek. It wasn't T-bone jarring, but it was sudden, loud, and designed purely to humiliate. The force jarred the poorly affixed wig slightly, sending a spike of fleeting panic through Keanu. He had practiced taking stage punches, movie punches, and avoiding actual punches, but taking a slap, undeserved, completely transactional, while trapped beneath 3 hours of meticulous prosthetics, was an entirely new exercise in control. Keanu didn't react as John Wick would have, by effortlessly catching the wrist and rendering the limb useless. He reacted as Stephen Olide, the exhausted, abused worker. He let out a low, involuntary gasp of pain and shame, twisting his body away from the executive. His heavily shadowed hands instantly flew up, not defensively but supplicatingly, covering the lower half of his face, hiding the stinging red mark the slap had left. He staggered backward half a step, the hump in his back seeming to deepen under the weight of the insult. Please, ma'am, I understand." "It won't happen again," he stammered, the gravelly Stephen Olide voice trembling perfectly. The executive smoothed her silk sleeve again, entirely satisfied with the display of fear and submission. She adjusted the cufflink, dismissing the incident instantly. "See that it doesn't, Stephen. Now get back to work. And stay out of the high-traffic areas. You're distracting." Quote dot. She turned, her movements crisp and precise, tapping her expensive heel against the polished marble floor. She didn't look back at the hunched figure clutching his face. She was already gone, floating toward the executive elevators, having restored the order of the universe with a single, contemptuous gesture. Keanu remained frozen for a full 30 seconds, his hands pressed hard against his cheeks, feeling the raw burn of the physical impact and the white-hot core of his internalized fury. The disguise felt suffocating, but it was working. He slowly lowered his hands, Stephen Olide's eyes, hidden beneath the folds of latex, now cold and utterly lucid. He reached down, adjusting the alignment of the mop handle very deliberately, ensuring the hidden microphone was still active and transmitting. I just got slapped in my own building, he thought, the fury tightening into a focused, sharp resolve. And that, right there, is Exhibit A. He picked up the bucket, the water sloshing against the plastic, and pushed the squeaky cart down the hallway, the sound of the wheels, the only noise in the oppressive silence. He was collecting much more than dust and discarded coffee cups. He was collecting evidence that would collapse entire careers. Fiona's aggressive, gold-ringed finger had stopped just shy of Stephen Olide's breastbone, the gesture a physical manifestation of her disdain. After delivering a final, cutting remark about costing the company thousands, she had pivoted, leaving the janitor to gather the remnants of the spilled mineral water. Keanu had waited, patiently, for the feeling of pure, primal anger to dissipate. John Wick was not allowed to surface here. Stephen was too tired, too defeated, to feel anything but heavy resignation. He catalogued the audio evidence, the exact words, the tone, the implied threat, and finished his shift. The next day, Keanu deployed Stephen in the residential wing of the complex, the expensive penthouse levels where Fiona and others of her social stratum actually lived, not just worked. The air was sterile, filtered, and oppressively silent. He pushed the mop cart slowly down a long, white corridor that seemed designed to emphasize the cheapness of his uniform. He had orchestrated a scheduled break in a small utility alcove, far enough from the main traffic to appear inconspicuous, but close enough to the staff service elevators to observe the rhythm of the hired help. He slumped onto a plastic crate, massaging the small of his back, the heavy silicone appliances making the simple act of sitting down feel like a monumental effort. The polyester shirt was clinging to him in the stagnant air. He pulled a dry, stale cracker from his own pocket, a meager lunch Stephen Olide would logically carry, and chewed slowly, his eyes half closed in a convincing portrait of exhaustion. He was testing the environment. He had seen the corruption in the boardrooms and heard the toxicity from the executives. Now he wanted to see if the rot had seeped down to the foundation. He didn't have to wait long. A sudden, soft click of the service elevator announced the arrival of another staff member. Keanu didn't look up, only heard the quiet, rubber-soled approach. It was Chioma, one of the resident maids. She was younger than Stephen, perhaps mid-30s, dressed in a crisply starched black and white uniform, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to become invisible. She was carrying a stack of pristine white towels and a small, insulated lunch bag. She paused about 10 feet away, glancing quickly up and down the empty corridor, a silent check for surveillance or supervising staff. Her expression was careful, professional, but when she looked at Stephen, the practiced neutrality faltered. Her eyes held a deep, tired sympathy. She walked casually toward him, ostensibly to adjust a rack of cleaning supplies near the alcove. "Stephen," she murmured, her voice a low, hesitant whisper, lightly accented. Keanu waited, forcing Stephen to react slowly, as if pulling himself from a shallow doze. "Ma'am?" he rasped, keeping the low, gravelly tone necessary for the disguise. Chioma's hand moved quickly, discreetly. She didn't offer the item directly. She placed the insulated lunch bag onto the floor beside his mop cart and bumped it lightly with her foot, covering the transfer with the movement of straightening a bottle of window cleaner. "They don't pay us enough to starve," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the door to ensure no one saw them fraternizing. "And they certainly don't pay us enough to listen to that." She was referring, Keanu knew instantly, to the verbal abuse that had become commonplace, the kind Fiona had levied the day before. "I'm sorry, Stephen," she added, her voice dropping lower, holding a profound, genuine regret. "Not from me. I'm sorry from this place. From them." She didn't wait for a response. She gave him a quick, meaningful nod, a silent communication of shared burden, and moved quickly toward the next apartment door, her cleaning supplies rattling softly. Within seconds she was gone. Keanu didn't move for nearly a minute. He listened to the silence of the luxury corridor, the soft thrum of the expensive HVAC system, the only constant sound. Slowly, carefully, Stephen Olide reached down and picked up the lunch bag. It had a comforting, warm weight. Inside, he felt a sandwich wrapped in foil, an apple, and a small container that smelled faintly of savory stew. It was a proper, home-cooked meal, not a corporate cafeteria offering. He placed the bag on his lap. Beneath the thick, hot silicone mask, Keanu Charles Reeves felt a genuine, unexpected sting of emotion. He had expected to find rot, toxic management, abused systems, and financial exploitation. He had armed himself with recording devices and legal strategies, prepared for war against corporate arrogance. But he hadn't anticipated this. A clandestine act of pure, unsolicited human kindness slipped to him in the darkness of a utility alcove by a woman who probably needed the food more than he did. Chioma was apologizing for the moral bankruptcy of the company he secretly co-owned. Keanu sat there, the heat of the food warming his synthetic polyester lap, realizing this single act of compassion was infinitely more valuable than all the dirt he had recorded in the previous days. If the rot was at the top, the heart was still beating strongly, hidden deep within the structure, right here in the hands of the staff, like Chioma. He knew exactly who he needed to protect, and exactly who he needed to fire. He slipped the bag into his own utility pouch and straightened his spine, ignoring the way the prosthetics pinched. Stephen Olide was still hunched, tired and invisible. But the shareholder beneath the disguise was, for the first time since the investigation began, profoundly encouraged. The test was over. Now it was time for the correction. He pulled a dry, stale sandwich out of the brown paper bag, a predictable lunch for a man like Stephen Olide, bought at the discount grocery store 3 days prior. Keanu tore a piece off, chewing slowly, allowing the boredom of the character to settle over him like a shroud. This entire process was taxing, not just physically due to the silicone and weighted suit, but mentally. The sheer monotony was the perfect camouflage. A sudden, sharp sound, the clack of expensive, pointed heels on polished marble, pierced the penthouse silence. Keanu froze, the half-chewed bread forgotten. He adjusted his position on the crate, slumping further, ensuring his mop cart created a visual barrier. Honestly, Chelsea, the sheer incompetence. A voice hissed, dangerously close. It was Fiona. She sounded smug, relaxed, and entirely off guard. I heard the Q4 report was brutal, Chelsea replied, her voice breathy and conspiratorial. They were standing perhaps 10 feet away, on the small, decorative balcony just outside the utility alcove door. The door was ajar, allowing Stephen to hear everything clearly without being seen. Brutal? It was perfect, Fiona scoffed, the sound like a rusty hinge. That's what they don't understand. I need the street price to tank. I need every internal metric to look like we're steering the Titanic into an iceberg. The only reason the board hasn't panicked yet is the legacy shareholder. Quote, dot. Keanu's stomach tightened. Legacy shareholder. That was him. The passive one? Chelsea asked. The ghost one. The one who won't show up, won't engage, and just holds this massive block of shares handed down from the founder days. Fiona explained, her voice dropping slightly, laced with malice. He's the only thing keeping them from the hostile leverage I've already set up. If I can prove internal mismanagement and gross negligence, the board is forced to sell off assets to cover debt, diluting the value of those old shares. Quote, dot. Keanu stopped breathing. This wasn't just about yelling at janitors or inflating expense reports. This was full corporate sabotage, designed to orchestrate a hostile takeover by devaluing the company until his block of ownership was insignificant. He needed proof. Now, maintaining the slow, heavy movement of Stephen Olide, as if the simple effort of shifting his weight was painful, Keanu slid his hand down to the pocket of his tattered uniform pants. He had modified a tiny, high-fidelity recorder disguised inside an antiquated pager. His fingers, thick with prosthetics, fumbled slightly, but years of perfecting action sequences meant his dexterity, even muffled, was unparalleled. Click. The indicator light was visible only to him, hidden beneath the lip of the crate. Fiona continued, oblivious. I fired 3 department heads this month, Chelsea. Totally innocent people, but I needed the chaos. I need the paper trail to show a pattern of irreversible decline. The goal is simple. I seize majority control through a special acquisition fund by the end of Q1, using the debt I created to buy up the diluted stock cheaply. Quote. But what if the major shareholder surfaces? What if he decides to intervene? Chelsea sounded genuinely worried. Fiona laughed, a chilling, cold sound. And do what? He hasn't shown his face in 5 years. He's some Hollywood idiot who inherited a golden parachute and probably uses the dividend checks to fund his ridiculous motorcycle collection. He doesn't know the difference between EBITDA and a lunch break. If he tried to step in now, he'd expose himself as incompetent, and I'd bury him in legal paperwork before he could spell litigation. Quote. The rage Keanu felt was a controlled burn now, not the primal anger of John Wick, but the focused, analytical fury of a co-owner watching someone burn down his house for the insurance money. Hollywood idiot. Motorcycle collection. The physical exhaustion Stephen Olide embodied was momentarily forgotten. Keanu leaned back slightly against the cool concrete wall, letting the full weight of the conversation wash over the microphone. Fiona was signing her professional death warrant, detailing insider trading, stock manipulation, and reckless firing of staff, all in the casual confidence that no one important was listening. She paused, then sighed contentedly. And the best part? The one person who could possibly tie all the threads together. That poor, terrified little janitor I chewed out yesterday. He's cleaning up the penthouse level now. Couldn't spot a fraud if it smacked him with a gold ring. Quote. Fiona and Chelsea finished their drinks discussing plans for a yachting trip. Funded, Keanu noted darkly, by the impending hostile takeover. The clack of their heels faded down the corridor. Keanu waited 5 full minutes, motionless, then slowly, with the agonizing effort of an 80-year-old man, he reached down. Click. Recorder off. The proof was secured. It was devastating, unambiguous, and came directly from the perpetrator's mouth. Stephen Olide slowly unwrapped his stale sandwich, took a bite, and chewed methodically. He had come here worried about his investment. He was leaving with evidence of grand larceny and a clear understanding of exactly who needed to be held accountable. His shift wasn't over yet, but the investigation was complete. The time for Stephen Olide was running out. Keanu Reeves needed to make an appearance. The recording had been damning. Fiona's voice, cold and clinical, detailing her strategy to weaponize the Q4 earnings report, ensuring the stock price plummeted low enough for her shell company to buy out the remaining vulnerable shares. She needed to eliminate the legacy shareholder, the very man standing 10 feet from her chewing a stale sandwich. Keanu didn't finish the bread. He quietly slipped out of the utility alcove, his movements heavy and geriatric, the silence of Stephen Olide surrounding him. He spent the rest of the day cleaning the floors Fiona would soon walk across as she made her final, fatal mistake. 3 days later, the atmosphere in the company's main ballroom was strained and falsely cheerful. It was the Emergency Strategy Mixer, a hastily organized, mandatory event designed to soothe high-level stakeholders and minor investors after the disastrous earnings report. Fiona, crisp in a bespoke suit, worked the room, her voice dripping with sympathetic concern for the company's unforeseen turbulence. Keanu, draped in the Stephen Olide shell, pushed his heavy aluminum cart slowly along the perimeter. He wore the weighted boots, the silicone cowl, and the thick, yellow-stained overalls. He was the ghost in the machine, mopping up spilled Prosecco and scooping discarded canapes into his trash bag, observing the nervous energy pulsing through the 300 people in the room. He saw the signal, a faint, almost imperceptible nod from his security chief, positioned strategically near the main exit, disguised as a catering manager. It was time. Keanu maneuvered his cart, not toward the restrooms, but straight toward the elevated stage, where Fiona was preparing to give her closing remarks. The remarks that would subtly urge the panicked shareholders to liquidate their positions before the inevitable collapse she herself engineered. He stopped the cart directly behind the podium. Fiona tapped the microphone. And so, friends and colleagues, she began, projecting faux sincerity. We are facing a reckoning. But the board and I are confident that with aggressive streamlining, clang. Stephen Alide, the old janitor, had apparently misjudged the proximity of the podium's supporting column. The mop handle hit the metal, rattling the microphone stand and sending a reverberating echo through the massive ballroom. 100 eyes snapped toward the old man. Fiona stopped, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. The professional charm evaporated instantly. "Stephen, for God's sake, get that thing out of here. Now! You re-interrupting," she hissed, barely keeping her voice low enough to avoid being heard by the microphone. Stephen Alide bowed slightly, the exaggerated hunch making the gesture look pathetic. He mumbled an apology, a barely audible, gravelly sound that seemed to be pulled from a lifetime of chewing stale sandwiches. "I said, now," Fiona repeated, louder this time, her patience gone. She walked quickly off the stage toward the janitor, ready to launch a verbal tirade. As she reached him, Keanu lifted his head. The movement was barely noticeable, but the light hit his eyes differently. They weren't the dull, watery eyes of Stephen Alide. They were sharp, focused, and intensely blue. "I don't think I will," the voice said. It wasn't think the gravelly mumble. It was lower, richer, and possessed a commanding resonance that cut through the buzz of the crowd. Fiona stopped dead, 2 feet away. "What did you say?" Keanu stood up. It was not a smooth movement. The weighted suit fought him. For the first time in months, he straightened his back, the heavy silicone prosthetics straining against the sudden posture change. The old man grew 3 inches taller, the movement snapping the spine out of the hunched position Stephen had maintained. The entire ballroom watched. The janitor was shedding his skin. Keanu reached up and grabbed the edge of the gray, matted wig, pulling it off with a sharp rip. Fine, dark, thick hair spilled out, catching the spotlight. Then his fingers went to the edge of the heavy silicone cowl wrapped around his neck and jaw. He pulled the thick, rubbery mask off, peeling it away from his face with deliberate slowness. The features underneath were perfectly sculpted, recognizable in every corner of the globe. The high cheekbones, the slight stubble, the look of intense, weary purpose. A collective, stunned gasp swept through the mixer. One woman dropped her champagne flute. The sound was deafening. Fiona stared, her face draining of all color. Her lips moved silently as she processed the impossible. The Hollywood superstar was standing in the middle of her corporate meltdown party. "Oh, my God," whispered a junior VP near the bar. That S, Keanu Reeves." Keanu ignored the crowd. His eyes were locked on Fiona. He stripped off the weighted overalls, dropping them onto the marble floor, revealing a sharp, slate-gray 3-piece suit underneath, custom-made to fit the man, not the character. He stepped over the discarded uniform and walked purposefully to the podium, picking up the microphone Fiona had been using. He looked out at the sea of shocked faces, the investors, the board members, the executives, and smiled faintly, a smile that promised retribution. "Good evening, everyone," Keanu said, his voice now strong and clear, amplified throughout the room. He held their attention effortlessly, the natural magnetism of his celebrity overpowering the financial panic. He paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the line Fiona would never forget. "I know what many of you are thinking. What is the star of The Matrix doing dressed like the resident old man from The Shining?" He chuckled darkly. He took a slow breath, letting the full gravity of the next statement settle over the room. His voice went quiet, yet carried the weight of absolute ownership. "My name is Keanu Charles Reeves," he declared, meeting Fiona's frantic, terrified gaze. He then pointed a finger down at the discarded janitor uniform and the mop cart. "And I spent the last 3 months dressed as Stephen Alide. I was concerned about the reports, the rumors, and the overall trajectory of this company. I listened, I watched, and I recorded every single meeting, phone call, and hushed conspiracy." He lowered his hand and drove the final devastating stake through Fiona's strategy. "And for those of you worried about the legacy shareholder, or the person who might save this investment, he concluded, his voice ringing with authority and finality. Let me make this perfectly clear. I am Keanu Reeves, and I own 51 of this company. Fiona stood at the gleaming podium, backlit by the company logo, which projected an image of competence she utterly lacked. The shareholders, minor and major alike, watched her anxiously. And so, while we mourn the recent turbulence, Fiona continued, her smile thin and predatory, we must act decisively. I am proposing a special authorization vote. Effective immediately, the board grants my committee temporary, unilateral financial authority to navigate this immediate crisis. This was the final move. Temporary authority meant immediate control, followed by the strategic liquidation of assets in the buyout. Keanu, still draped in the yellowed overalls of Stephen Olide, was cleaning an imaginary stain 10 feet from the stage. He adjusted the belt of his uniform, his hand brushing the microtransmitter clipped beneath his shirt. All those in favor of Motion 34A, please indicate by raising your... Fiona began, sweeping her arm across the room. The air suddenly went dead. The main ballroom sound system crackled violently, overriding the podium microphone. A thin, digital beep sounded, the telltale warning of an unauthorized audio loop activation. Fiona frowned. Security, there seems to be a technical. Then, Fiona's own voice, cold and detached, boomed through the speakers. The Q4 report guarantees a 10-point drop. The legacy shareholder will panic. That idiot doesn't even know what an earnings call is. Our shell company buys the remainder at pennies on the dollar. It's clean, efficient, and irreversible. A collective gasp swept through the room, quickly replaced by panicked murmurs. Every eye turned to Fiona, whose composed veneer had shattered into pure, toxic fury. "What is this? Stop that recording!" she shrieked into the dead microphone. The janitor, Stephen Olide, moved. He shuffled forward, with excruciating slowness, pulling his heavy aluminum cart directly onto the raised platform. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his back hunched, his eyes, which now held a terrifying razor-sharp focus, fixed on Fiona. "Olide," Fiona spat, recognizing the man she had mocked and dismissed. "You are fired. Get off this stage immediately, or I will have you arrested for corporate espionage." Stephen Olide didn't flinch. He reached up with a thick, gloved hand and adjusted the collar of his uniform. The microphone still played the damning audio, looping Fiona's confession of market manipulation and shareholder fraud. Then, the janitor reached for his face. The movement was deliberate and agonizingly slow. He found the seam of the silicone cowl at the base of his neck, near the synthetic hairline of gray, thinning hair. He pulled. The prosthetic face of Stephen Olide peeled away with a wet, tearing sound, revealing the tanned, perfect skin beneath. The gray wig fell away, replaced by the characteristic black, shoulder-length mane. The crowd's murmuring stalled into horrified silence. The thick, weighted boots slammed against the marble floor as he straightened his spine. The change was instantaneous and impossible. The feeble old man vanished, replaced by a figure who stood 6'1", radiating an unexpected, commanding presence. Fiona staggered backward, grasping the podium for support. It was impossible. It was him. "Keanu Reeves?" someone whispered from the back row. It took a few agonizing seconds for the high-level executives to reconcile the fact that the movie star, the guy who rode motorcycles and filmed action sequences, was standing in their midst, wearing stained overalls and holding a trash bag. Keanu Reeves stepped down stage, pulling the heavy yellow overalls open and letting them drop to the floor, revealing expensive, tailored dark trousers and a crisp white shirt beneath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, laminated card. He held it up, not to the crowd, but directly to Fiona. "I believe you are looking for the legacy shareholder?" Keanu asked, his real voice now smooth, deep, and carrying the weight of undisputed authority. a tone he usually saved for negotiating the final edit of a major studio film. Fiona shook her head violently, utterly defeated. "It's impossible," she choked out. Keanu slipped the shareholder card back into his pocket. "When I found out the company I co-founded, the company where I still hold 42% ownership, was being bled dry by a cynical, short-sighted opportunist, I had two options. Quote, dot. He paused, scanning the hundreds of dumbfounded faces. Option 1. Send in the lawyers and accountants. Option 2. Go undercover and find out exactly where the rot was festering. He nodded toward the discarded Olide uniform. I chose option 2. It was important to see your work from the bottom up, Fiona, and to hear your plans firsthand. Quote, dot. As if on cue, a pair of federal agents in dark suits walked swiftly through the ballroom doors. They moved directly toward the stage. The recording is airtight, Fiona, Keanu said, his voice flat. Market manipulation, intent to defraud, and insider trading. Gentlemen, she's all yours. Quote, dot. The agents cuffed Fiona quickly, ignoring her desperate, sputtering protests. As they led her away, she screamed one last accusation. You're an actor! You don't belong here! You'll destroy this company! Quote, dot. Keanu watched her go, a quiet intensity settling back into his eyes. He then turned back to the room. The silence was thick, charged with the shock of the double reveal, the Hollywood star and the majority owner. No, I won't destroy it, Keanu countered, speaking to the entire organization now. But we're going to rebuild it starting right now, based on merit and integrity, not spreadsheets and cruelty. Quote, dot. He scanned the faces until he found Chioma, the young woman who had stood up to Fiona earlier that week, the one whose dreams Fiona had tried to crush. Chioma was pale, clutching a glass of Prosecco she hadn't dared to drink. Chioma, Keanu called out. The young analyst tentatively stepped forward. Chioma, I saw the projections you sent the board 6 weeks ago, Keanu stated publicly. The ones Fiona binned, arguing they were too ethical. They were insightful, viable, and morally sound. Quote, dot. Keanu walked toward her, holding out his hand. Your projections are now our strategy, he announced. Effective immediately, the position of Chief Strategy Officer is open. It's yours if you want it. Quote, dot. Chioma simply stared, her mouth slightly open, tears welling up. But I'm not qualified, she whispered, overwhelmed. Keanu smiled, a genuine, warm smile that had captivated billions. It was the first time he had truly smiled since donning the Stephen Olide prosthetics. Qualification is only part of the equation, Keanu Reeves said, gripping her hand firmly. Integrity is the legacy. Welcome aboard, CSO. Let's get to work. Quote, dot.